Ever since Tabzz, the former AD carry of Alliance, made an answer to an Ask FM question where someone asked him about his thoughts on Alliance, and he outlined kind of the problems he saw in the team and how his experience of playing with specific players and their role in the team had been, and then kind of went into some reasons as to why he thought he'd done badly at Worlds. Well, badly in as much as they went out of the group stage. Obviously, they had some good results as well. And actually, this blog was, this Ask FM answer was very reasonable. It was quite rational. It was fairly objective. Like, he took his subjective opinion on people and stuff like that, but he put it through quite a reasonable prism. Like, he'd say, like, okay, this problem had this player, this teammate had a problem in this area, but he was good in this area over here. And, you know, collectively we had issues here, and this player up here, I could see how this strength worked for him, but sometimes he wasn't able to do this. And he did this with his own player as well. He was able to explain that he knows that he himself didn't perform, and there was times when he could see that he wasn't able to play up to the level. And then he made the classic mistake of actually attempting to give people an insight into his world and explain why, subjectively for him, he'd underperformed. Now, when you do this, there's two ways it works out. If you're a really loved player who everyone likes the personality of for whatever reason, or you've marketed yourself very well, people just take whatever you said and they'll actually use that as an excuse, and they'll go, right, well, yeah, it's fine that player X always underperforms in this situation and never does finish top 8, and he says he's trying his hardest, and, you know, he worked his best and he was just unlucky and he felt nervous and that. They'll take these as if they're facts and they'll just reference them forever. Meanwhile, if you go back and you look at cases where someone who's really not liked, maybe his persona comes off as arrogant, or they don't like him, or he just doesn't seem like a personable type of guy, he could say the exact same thing and people will go, oh, why are you crying? Oh, what a joke you are, man. You get paid thousands of dollars and have all these fans, and all you can do is complain. Like, why don't you man up and just play? Like, people will go with such vitriol or love and adornment or whatever, that's not even the right word, adoration the other way, depending, as far as I can tell, on the prism they look at the guy's statements through. It's either if they like him or they don't like him. In this particular scenario, I can totally see why the backlash against Tabzz because of his comments has gone this way. And not just on that, it's now spread. The vitriol, the bile has spread seemingly to all other aspects of how Tabzz has ever interacted with esports. And so that's what I'm going to address in this video. So let's start with the first thing that people go to before all the vlog comments. So they say that he's not a good enough player. He's not a good enough AD carry, and particularly, he's not a good enough AD carry for Alliance. With these sorts of people, I'd love to sit them down and say, and get definitions. What is your definition of a good AD carry? What should an AD carry do that is good, generally? Now let's go to Alliance. What should the AD carry be doing in Alliance? What is his job? What is required of him? What resources does he have to do that job? Because if you look at it this way, when I look at Tabzz over the last 2 splits in Europe, this guy is easily one of the top 2 AD carries in Europe. I even think a debate could always be made as to whether or not the best AD carry, particularly this last split, was him or Reckless. The reason why there could be a debate made, because then you'd go into other factors like, what is the style of their team? How does that contrast against their individual strengths? What are they able to do within the context of the team? How important are they to wins? Who do they play with? So some of these areas, the really quick way to go through it all would be, Tabzz pretty much ended up having to be the second carry most of the time in his team, because Wicked couldn't carry, and he's a top laner. It's very hard for them to carry anyway, and he would get caught a lot. Shook would have his own issues. Sometimes he'd be very dominant. Sometimes he'd have no impact at all. Nif's a passive, supportive support player. So it was Froggen 1v9ing a lot of the time, and then it came down to Tabzz to be the secondary carry a lot of the time. He was forced, he had to have a big impact. Otherwise, his team wasn't going to win, because sometimes Froggen 1v9ing, or even just playing well, wasn't going to be enough to get wins over certain teams in Europe. And abroad, obviously. So going beyond that, now let's ask ourselves, style of play for the team. They had a very passive style of play in Alliance. It wasn't a style that promoted playmaking, about going in and then people follow you in, or making a shot call and people listening to you. It was this passive style, going for very few mistakes, trying to go late, trying to just win out with the more small marginal error. Well, this isn't at all the sort of world that Reckless was living in. Reckless was living in a world where he had a fast kind of a pick-based comp-based style of a team who liked to make plays in the mid-game. And in his team, he wasn't even having that much impact. He was having some impact some of the time. Some games he had no impact whatsoever, even if his stats were good, he was in position to get it, and all the resources were there for him to carry, for him to do well. Sometimes he just wouldn't. Sometimes he'd have a great game. Sometimes he wouldn't, though. His overall impact on the team was that he had less of him. Reckless had less of an impact on Fnatic than Tabzz had on Alliance, and their success for both teams. Likewise, Reckless played with Yellowstar, the best Western support Tabzz played with Nif, a good support in Europe, but not one of the best. Probably top 3. I'd say top 3 is about reasonable. Top 3, top 2, it's around about there. But Yellowstar was clearly head and shoulders above him, unlike Tabzz and Reckless in that debate. And by the way, this isn't a topic that's just my opinion. Talk to a lot of AD carries and you'll find, at least before the Alliance Worlds incident, that they were really split on who was the best. A lot of them, even the European ones who know these guys, it all came down to what criteria did they like. Did they like an aggression? Did they like a guy who tried to carry hard? Did they like the guy who just plays his role? The guy who plays a supportive aspect? All these different criteria came into deciding who you thought was the best. Now then, let's go to this issue that he was too passive and he wasn't enough of a playmaker. I'd first of all argue he couldn't be a playmaker. His style of team was incredibly passive and they actively almost went against the concept of playmaking. They didn't want to playmaking involves a degree of risk or controlled risk or going into something knowing that there's risk but there's a specific reward and you see that the reward could outweigh it and so you're willing to gamble to go for it. That was the antithesis of the Alliance style of play. It weren't into that at all. Instead, they wanted to play that passive reactive style, but you were forced to try and play it to perfection, which they were nearly able to do a lot of the time in Europe. Otherwise, you might lose. But if you did it perfectly, it's true, you would win and it would look flawless and so clean and wow, what a great start. We saw at their best, that's what they could do. They could do it at Najin White Shield. But you know what? At their worst, they could also lose to Najin White Shield the same way. And then they could even get fucking wrecked by Kaboom when they totally abandoned their style and went to a different approach. So they had something in mind that they wanted to accomplish and Tabzz had to exist. His circle had to exist within the larger circle of what Alliance was and what they were trying to do. The reason I say this is because the idea that Tabzz is naturally passive and wants to be passive as an AD carry doesn't match up with history at all. First of all, aside from the fact the guy was a fucking mid laner who played like Assassin Champs and used to go balls deep on everything, aside from the fact that that obviously still exists, go back to the Lemon Dogs days of later in 2013. This is a guy playing with Mithy, who by the way was a really aggressive support. These guys pioneered having that super aggressive bot lane style where both players want to trade constantly. They know the extent and the range and the limitations of their champ comp against the others and they know where they are and when they can take aggression and when they can dominate the bot lane and smash it and go right through. And that's why they were destroying the bot lanes in Europe towards that end of time. Now then, when Tabzz lost Smithy, he came to Alliance, he got Nif. Nif is a great AD support player in Europe. In European history, he's probably the second best support player of all time, or third. He's at least top 3 because his consistency, he has great mechanics, but he uses them in a passive way. I always compare him to like the Lost Boys style of support, as in, whereas like the Mad Life is like he uses the mechanics to bully the opponent, to make plays, to create instances, to bring teammates in, create kills, create plays, turn games. Instead, the Lost Boy style was Lost Boy used to be paired with Captain Jack, who used to get caught in the lane all the time. So Lost Boy had to use his mechanics, which were good, and his champion pool of certain styles of like supportive champs, specifically just to guard Captain Jack, to keep him alive, keep people off him. He'd be using the Flay to get people off. He used a hook just for the CC aspect. He wasn't making plays with it. He was kind of nullifying plays from the opponent. That's how I thought of Nif in this sense. That's why he was great paired with Candy Panda. Candy Panda could kind of push the aggression a bit, but then Nif would be there to keep him in range, to make sure they didn't go too crazy, to just keep it a solid bot lane. And in SK, they had a great top lane, and then they used to have quite an inconsistent but good mid laner and Ocelot for time. So it made sense in the past of these teams. In Alliance, pairing Nif up with this team that was already so passive in other respects or had aggressive elements which would go passive. So for example, Wicked would try to always win top lane, but if he was doing badly and he was losing, that now isn't aggression that's benefiting you. Likewise, Shook would be aggressive, would snowball the whole game, dominate, but if he got behind and if he was on a champion like Kha'Zix or Lee Sin, suddenly he'd try and farm or he'd try and do these weird ganks that weren't going to work at that point in the game and he'd start to have no game impact. And then you've got Froggen, whose style is very passive. He's amazing at it. He's the best at it. But you need to have aggressive players with him to counteract that, in my opinion. So in my opinion, if they'd have given an aggressive support, obvious example would be a Yellow Star, someone who likes to roam, likes to make players, like to trade in the lane, go for fights, get into team fights, get into team fights mid-game and actually trying to win the game based on fighting, I think Tabzz would have blossomed in Alliance. He would have been, I think he could have been the best AD carry in Europe. Think of that what you will. Now then, let's go beyond that. Tabzz, one of the mistakes he made, and I say mistakes, they're not mistakes to me. I loved that vlog, that answer. I thought it was very open, very honest. I thought it was quite rational. But one of the mistakes in terms of public reaction to this was when he admitted that he burned out from practicing too much. And the amount he gave was, he thought around 6 to 8 hours a day was kind of the reasonable amount that you could expect someone to play League of Legends in a competitive context trying to win the game. This guy's entirely right. That's an entirely reasonable amount of time that you should have to practice within a day to be even the best. The reason why other people have to work more is because they haven't found good systems of practice. The approach should be to work smarter, not just work the maximum amount of time. That's going to ruin your life if you're losing games especially. It's going to put you in situations where you're trying the same thing over and over again. It's not working. You're thinking that just by doing it more and more, it works. But actually, by doing it more and more, maybe you just get slightly better at it, or your skills are slightly better that you can brute force it. But actually, it wasn't the right approach, or it wasn't working entirely correctly, which instead would have been a better thing to think about outside of just playing it, rather than just brute force over and over and over and over and over. Because then you're going to run into problems when it doesn't work. The reason why I bring this up is because this whole issue just highlights the Western approach and the self-loathing that the community has for itself. Where if players don't want to just give up their whole life just to play the game, we make out like they're like lazy pieces of shit who don't deserve to be the best. I know some other guy would practice 30 hours. Really? Well, if he is good, if he isn't, then shut up. Because having fucking... I'll give you a good example, okay? Having... let me think of one that wouldn't be too ridiculous. Has to be a European one. So let's see... Okay, having Celiva play 15 hours a day like Hart says he does in Korea, 15 hours a day from Celiva without Alliance playing in their team, practicing as hard as he can, and every day after every loss practicing, would not ever give you close to the same results as Tabzz doing his 6 to 8 hours a day before he burns out and then trying his best in approaching it. Tabzz would be worlds better than Celiva there. So this is a stupid example to give unless you've got real options. Also, the reason why I say self-loathing is because part of this comes from the fans. The fans themselves, who are guys who are in their own life, usually watch League of Legends while procrastinating, don't really give 100% in school because we're all Westerners, we don't really give a fuck that much. They want to have fun with their life because we all do, and we're all younger, well, they are at least young teenagers and young adults, etc. Don't want to have to commit to never having fun and only pursuing their career. They are like this. Then they get other people who are the same age group and peer group as them and want to live their life playing this wonderful computer game and having success in it. And then they throw all their shit that they're not willing to do in their own life onto those and go, well, since you're a pro player, it's unprofessional if you don't do that, and you should do that. You know what? Real sportsmen, yeah, by the way, guys who are like 28 years old and get paid millions of dollars and have an entire support system, they're willing to play all this amount. Like, these are ridiculous standards and expectations to hold these young men to. A lot of these guys, Tabzz is a great example, are doing their best, and even under trying circumstances and the wrong sort of team or a bad attitude within aspects of the team, or just unproductive towards helping your own success, they're willing to grind away. They're willing to put in the work. They're willing to think of it as a job, play more than they even want to. So I applaud that. I don't look down on them and call them pieces of shit and then try and say, oh, this guy deserved it instead. No, he didn't. He didn't. That's why he's not in that team. That's why he's not good enough. That's why he's stuck at that level, even if he plays 18 hours a day. And if he's willing to say, oh, well, everyone should play 18 hours a day, then he's sold out his own teammates because he'll burn out himself. And this is an issue. So everyone lauds the Koreans, these amazing Koreans who practice. And we hear these stories about Hart practices 16 hours a day and sleeps 4 hours and then has his breakfast. And you know what? Hart's doing it wrong way. Because here's the thing, within that story, the person telling the story was Mata, the best support player of all time and in the world at the time, and he wasn't having to practice that much to be the best, the absolute best in every regard at the position. He wasn't having to do that. It's about talent level. It's about what you need to get out of it. And here's the case I'd make. Look at League of Legends, the best Koreans. Think of the best of all time. You think of Shy, you think of Macnoon, you think of Reaped, you're thinking of Mad Life, you're thinking of Flame, you're thinking of all these different names who were the best, the absolute best Dade. Everyone, except for a couple on that list, burned out hard after about a year, most, to a year and a half. People like Macnoon, and I'm not joking, lasted about a year before they were burned to a crisp and needed time off and needed time to pull back, and their super aggressive playing style had been countered, or they just played too much and they just weren't in it and they weren't motivated and they had mental issues because they were playing a ridiculous amount of time. You don't know what these Korean team houses are like. There are team houses where there are stories where guys wouldn't come back for the curfew. They'd be half an hour late for the two hour curfew you're allowed to leave the house during a day. And they'd get kicked from the team, or they'd get put in the doghouse, or they'd get punishments. This is the sort of pressure cooker these guys are living in. Not only that, what if you succeed and you win OGN and maybe even win Worlds, and then you think to yourself, I've won everything. And then next day the coach is like, back to practice, 14 hours a day again. You're like, it's going to be hard to find motivation there. Only certain people are almost sociopathic to the extent that they really can have the desire, like, I must win every single time. A lot of people, once they get to their goals, they actually might not feel like investing that much again next time to go, and they want to invest an amount, but now they're willing to have a little bit more free time. Well, I should have some free time now. I can breathe a little bit. No. Not in this world. In this world, the fans and the press and the coaches and everyone else and the other players who were younger ones trying to come up all try to bully you and force you into thinking that you have to be a monk. You have to give your whole life just to the game, and that there is no reward at the end of it. The reward is just to give your life and to be a player, and some sort of penance that if you want to be a pro player and look about some money, give everything. We want everything from you. And give it to us now. And if you don't give us, you're greedy and selfish. And what a bad teammate you are. Toxic presence. Like, this is a disgusting attitude to have towards people. It's no compassion in this whatsoever. And so the reason I also bring that up is because a more famous game for Koreans was StarCraft Brood War. And within this game, it was incredibly hard to get to the top. There were thousands and thousands of kids, even in the amateur scene, playing hours and hours every day, looking at every replay, trying to get to the top. And so if you got to the top, there's no, out of all these one-on-one tournaments hosted, right? There might have been, let's say 50 in all of history. No great player ever won more than 6. And most players, even really good ones, didn't even win 1, and then those who won 1 generally only won 1 and dropped off. Part of the reason why, again, they would have like a year where they'd go to the top and then they'd burn out. Same thing, they were practicing too much. Even the greatest players ever, once they get into these ruts, etc., mostly they wouldn't give them time off. I'll give you an example of a player who went to the top again and again of the max level of performance and kept being able to come back. It was my favourite player, Bisu, the Protoss player. 2 times in history, actually maybe even 3, he had these scenarios where he bottomed out completely. He was totally burned out and he was crashing, and his game, it was incredibly skilled still. You could still see all the parts needed to succeed, but it wasn't working. Something was off about his feel, and he was playing badly and his confidence was nowhere. And this is the one instance in the history of StarCraft Brood War I've ever heard of this, where his team understood that this was a guy who was kind of like a very special guy because he played very much on intuition. It wasn't just on strategy. And so you needed him to emotionally feel good and to have his head in the right place. And so 2 times at least, they took this guy out of the game, gave him vacations, paid vacations, told him don't play the game. Go away, take a vacation, and then he would come back after this period of time. What no other teams did, by the way. If you went bad there, they'd just work you to death, and then you went to the B team and you just stayed as a PR figure. They did this, and both times, within a month or 2 of coming back, he got right back to the top again and went in insane streaks where he was like the best elo, and he was dominating the game, and he would make a run in the Star League or one of the individual leagues or whatever. This is what's interesting. It almost proves the case of burnout, even this one example. And so let's go now from the burnout aspect to essentially what I'm addressing with him admitting this. It's the idea that he complains too much. Okay, maybe he did have a problem with that. If I've looked, Tabzz does seem like someone who's quite a complaining type of guy and who after the fact will find an excuse for why something happened. But like the Bisu example, this is a very talented guy. This is a guy who has a lot to give and who wants to find a way to be better. So to me, he's a talent that needs to be taken care of. I gave you the Bisu example, but I'll give you another example. Bjergsen, right now, is considered one of the best players in the whole world. Definitely one of the best Western players. We even now think of him as a player who's cool under pressure, who can lead his team even when his team's doing badly, and he really did, to some degrees, carry TSM to that amazing LCS NA title run. But if you know who Bjergsen was in Copenhagen Wolves in NIP, this young guy, this 16-year-old, 17-year-old guy, in this team where no one really thought of the other players as stars, they were still emerging as players, and actually some of them weren't even that good and rightfully have dropped out of the scene or gone other ways. In this team, you didn't see very many interviews from the guy. The guy seemed to be shielded from public pressure. They always mentioned how young he was and that he was still a young, inexperienced player. Players in the team played around him, trying to stop him getting shut down, stop him getting bullied, intimidated in the game where it might have broken him. He was protected and taken care of and groomed as talent, knowing, now they couldn't have known that they wouldn't get to reap the benefits of it, knowing that one day, if you did it this way and you allowed him to develop and you allowed his strengths to exist while even his weaknesses were there, eventually he'd get to a position where he could unlock all this potential and be this amazing player that we all think of now when we think of Bjergsen. So why isn't that allowed to happen with Tabzz? Why are other players who people like given a free pass for having problems in a team or saying, oh, well, his support's bad or his jungler's bad? They're given this free pass at that. Tabzz isn't. Tabzz is, simultaneously, people will say Nif is shit, and then they'll say Tabzz wasn't that good and was unimpressive in a bot lane. Well, which is it? If you think both are the same, then can one be influencing the other one there? I'll even say this as well. I think people go too far hating on Nif. People who go too far hating on Nif expect him to be the Mad Life player. He's not that sort of player. But if you look at what he does have, it's actually quite beautiful. It has its own aspect to the game where he can impact the game and he can have a big contribution. He's just not going to help an aggressive or an AD carry who wants to be aggressive in the way that Tabzz is reach his potential within the lineup. He needs a different sort of player. That's why actually Reckless might be a good fit for Tabzz actually. Not only that, as I kind of mentioned before, in some ways, Tabzz was the second best thing about Alliance. He was the guy really working towards. He's one of the only people I've heard in Alliance who actually properly acknowledged some of their problems. The others almost, like the worst he knows it, I think, this way. I like the guy, but he knows I think this way. I think Wicked's one of the worst. He's a great example of someone who has a lot of skill and can be good in very specific ways, but has the blinders on to anything that he's doing wrong or that's happening wrong in the game. And therefore, he always makes the same mistakes over and over again. And if you try to say, well, these mistakes are happening, he'll get into some sort of semantic argument with you about how if you just like redefine what happened, then it wasn't a mistake because it actually was the right way and it just wasn't played out correctly. And the next time it'll like it goes into this insane way, whereas you're just trying to look at the actual world as it is and say, look at what happened. X, Y, and Z always happen when you do A. You can't do A anymore. You're gonna have to switch to B. No, but A would work if Z. Like it goes like that. Another thing, people in the public who are willing to say things that are perceived as negative about their teammates. In reality, they're just critical. A bit like my video series. It's not negative. I'm not hating these people. I'm actually trying to help some of them unlock their potential and get to the best they can be, because it frustrates me when I see talented people who have the tools to make it, who don't, and then not only that, maybe you're in denial about not making it. You might see all these players who've learned the game. They know how to play the game of the PR aspect, and they know how to maintain this perfect image, or the image that they want the public to think of them as. And they'll say certain things that clearly aren't true. And if you know behind the scenes, they're 100% not true. And actually, they might even be portraying things entirely 180 to how they are to win in public, to make it seem like they were the good teammate, to make it seem like they never were douchey to their teammates, to make it seem like they were always working towards the benefit of everyone. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they're being really shitty to teammates, they're blaming teammates, they're maybe even lying and actually talking shit behind their teammates to other teams, even while they're still going to be that guy's teammate for another year, and just trashing them and maybe even bringing that guy's self-esteem down. All these things go on with other pros. Just because you don't know about them, that's why you imagine these pros to be more idealized. And then what's disgusting to me is I've seen people talk about people like Tabzz, who's a very honest guy and who really is what you see on the videos and in the vlogs there and the Ask FM answers. That's exactly what he's like as a person. He's just a heart on his sleeve sort of guy. When he comes forward like that and actually gives you some insight into these teams, people compare him even to the players I'm talking about, who are fucking disgraceful human beings if you ever got to know them on level. Not entirely. They're still just young guys trying to play. But at the moment, they're funneling their problems, etc., through the prism of blaming a teammate and just being an ass to this guy and demanding more from the team than they actually deserve based on how they play in the game and their skill level and what role they should have. All these people with all these problems, and someone comes forward and is actually reasonable and tries to outline the pros and the cons, and yeah, it was biased because it was biased to his opinion and his life experiences, and they have validity. Even if you, the random guy watching, saw an interview with Nif and he seemed like he was really awesome and he was doing exactly what he wanted, that doesn't mean that was the style that was working for Tabzz in Alliance. Don't be ridiculous. Don't project into a vacuum of what you don't know awesome things about other people. Then when someone actually gives you some information, just go, oh, well, you're being an asshole by saying that, or a douche. I look at Tabzz thing and I listen, if I was his PR manager, I'd say, okay, I probably wouldn't phrase some of those things like that. Keep a few of those things to yourself. But as a guy who's maybe a friend of his, or a guy in the pub, I'm not really that much of a friend, I just know him a bit, or a guy who's in the public and likes him, maybe that's a better way to phrase it. I look at that and I'm going, wow, what a great thing, what a brave thing to do. I know the possible backlash that's going to come, but I'm actually glad that now I have more of an insight onto Alliance. I have a sense of some of the things I already thought maybe were going, oh, here's maybe a seed of why. And now I could even take that, as subjective as it is and all that, and go to that player and say, well, do you have your side to this story? Is there some reason why he might have perceived it that way? Is there some aspect he's maybe even right? Or maybe he's just not seeing something a certain way. Now we can advance the conversation. To say that this is a bad thing is ignorant. To say that he's a bad player means you really, well, I won't be ridiculous, but I'd suggest you don't have a very good grasp on analysing how good a player is and what sort of role he's playing and the resources he's being given. This guy was an excellent player. He should be in a top team. I love his honesty. I hope he can get the right sort of team that actually would embrace that and would work around what he wants to work as, because I think he could definitely be a carrier or a top 2 carry in his team, as he was trying to do in Alliance. And I don't think that Alliance is now just going to cakewalk now that they've gotten rid of him as though he was the problem. In fact, that's the final thing I'll say. What's most distasteful is the way that I've noticed fans of teams, when a player's on the team, oh, they love him. But when he leaves and they get the sense that, wait a minute, maybe he was the reason why we were doing badly. Once he leaves and they get a better player, they always just all collectively, not even well agreeing on it, unconsciously decide, you know what, fuck that guy. Let's scapegoat him. He was the reason why everything went badly. Yeah, you're the reason why it was all shit and you're complaining and all the rest of it, and you didn't play this way and everyone else would have been great in the team, but it's all your fault. And they always shovel all the shit onto that one guy. Meanwhile, That's often not even the case at all. It's often totally ridiculous, and it distracts people from the real problems. Like what? So suddenly every Alliance fan in the universe loves Alliance's setup now and thinks it's amazing. And you know what? Suddenly it's not a problem that Shuck just has games where he has no impact. It's not a problem that Wicked gets his head caved in on about 7 out of the 8 viable champions in the game. That's not a problem at all. Nah, don't worry about that. It's all just Tabzz' fault for every now and then getting caught, or every now and then being a little too hesitant, or for every now and then having to play a matchup. We could have won the lane, but it can't, and so it has no little game impact. And then you know what? Sometimes, even despite all that, still carrying the game sometimes, still being great in team fights, still being a force of aggression in a team which sometimes suffers from a hesitation and lack of aggression. So people shovel all that shit onto him and ignore everything good he did. And yet that's ridiculous. Alliance had 99 problems and Tabzz wasn't the worst one. He was a problem. He had his problems. I thought there were times he choked. I thought there were times he was hesitant. I thought there were times where he had problems synergizing with Nif. But he definitely wasn't the biggest problem. In fact, he was one of the better aspects of Alliance. So stick that in your porridge and stir it around. Whatever that means. I made that up.